Hello, and welcome to the Great Global Healing Party. I'm your host and the inspiration for the Great Global Healing Party, Dr. Wendy Rowley. This January 2024 celebration is so that we may come together to unite as one heart and begin the healing of our collective ancestral human consciousness, increasing our potential for solutions and peace on earth. And this is just the beginning. Thank you for joining the party. In this episode, I am tickled to introduce Neale Donald Walsch. Mr. Walsch has written 40 books on contemporary spirituality and its practical application in everyday life, including his new book, so excited, The GODTALK, Experiences of Humanity's Connections with a Higher Power. This is a book in the Common Sentient book series. Neale is the best-selling author of the Conversations with God series, of which 7 of the 9 books made the New York Times bestseller list. Book 1 remained on that list for 134 weeks. His titles have been translated into 37 languages and have been read by millions of people around the world. Now, you might want to sit up and pay close attention because this interview is only available now and will not be included in the longer extended play offering. Today, he is going to speak about his new book, GODTALK. I'm very delighted to have you, and I'm very amazed. GODTALK is your 40th book. I just had to say that. Is there anything particular that inspired you to write this book at this time?
Well, yes, Wendy, thank you for asking. And by the way, thank you for inviting me to share this time with you. It's lovely to be here with you. Yes, I got a call, frankly. Most authors write books, and then they see if they can get a publisher who wants to publish them. And that's been my experience with the first 39 books that I wrote. But then one day, about a year ago, my phone rang, and a publisher was actually calling me. And I said, how can I help you? And they said, we would like to publish a book by you. Would you be willing to write a book that tells people, gives people little hints on how they could have their own conversations with God? Now, Wendy, that's a question I've been asked by many, many people since the Conversations with God books first came out. And I've been answering that question for 30 years, but I never really put it into a book format. So when I was invited to write this book, I said, I'd be very happy to do that. So I wrote the book, and they published it. And so it's been a wonderful joy for me to respond to their request and to their invitation to write a book. I'm very glad that it happened at this time, because before they sent me the invitation, but after I finished writing the book, many, many things started happening in the Middle East and elsewhere in our world. And our world is really facing difficult challenges. So I think that a book on how we could all have a deeper connection with the divine is aptly timed. And I'm very glad I've had the chance to offer this to people from the For What It's Worth department. I don't claim that it's the great book of all time, and some people might read it and get nothing out of it, although I would be very surprised if they did.
I think it's wonderful, and I appreciate you letting me have a copy to read. And I have some questions. You do such a good job of answering some questions I would have had, but I do have some questions. One of them is that you wrote on a personal level that the best reason to talk to God is to end our loneliness. And could you talk a little bit more about that? Because it seems to me there might be a couple of degrees of what a long-term relationship of talking to God can sort of do for us. And you give a variety of reasons in there. I was wondering if you could expound on that.
Yes, well, I'd be happy to, Wendy. I should explain that through most of my life, I have felt lonely at a soul level. My soul felt all alone. I felt I was out here in the world. And even when I was in a crowd of people, in fact, frankly, sometimes especially when I was in a room full of people, I would feel even more alone because I thought that, am I the only one, who's experiencing life the way I'm experiencing it? Now, I know that sounds arrogant, but I didn't mean it to be arrogant. It was just an example of how lonely I felt. I felt lonely because I didn't understand. You know what, Wendy? I thought, have I been dropped off here from another planet? I don't understand how people could interact the way they're interacting, how they could do what they're doing, say what they're saying. What kind of a civilization is this? This is the most uncivilized civilization I've ever experienced. So I actually had this idea in my mind that maybe I was dropped off here from another planet to live a life and then come back and report back on what my experience was. But then I finally realized, you know what, I need to talk to a higher authority about all of this. And so I thought, I wonder what would happen if I simply asked God those questions. I didn't get to that point, Wendy, until I was desperate. Desperation could be a wonderful motivation for many people. It certainly was for me, because everything in my life was falling apart at the same time. What happened in my life, Wendy, not that you didn't, not that you asked, but I'm going to tell you even without you asking. Now, maybe you should ask me what motivated me to have my first conversations with God.
Yes, I would love to hear that. What motivated you to have your first conversation?
Strange you should ask. I was suffering what I call the triple whammy. At one point in my life, now it's about 30, 31 or 2 years ago, my relationship with my significant other, with my wife, had broken down, and I couldn't keep it together. It was, I'm sure, mostly my fault, probably 90% my fault, 95% my fault, and 4 or 5% her fault, but I couldn't keep the relationship together. So, we had children together, and so I was feeling very, very sad about that, understandably sad. But we had an amicable parting. It wasn't bitter. We worked pretty hard with each other because we still had a wonderful friendship. So we decided, let's see if we can find a way to move through this experience in a decent way, in a gentle and caring way. So I agreed to move out. I said, well, how about if I just get a little apartment someplace? And she said, well, I don't want to force you to. I said, no, let's just. So we did what we call a trial separation. And so but I could see it was going to lead to a divorce. But 5 days after my relationship ended, I lost my job. And it wasn't because of bad performance. I wasn't fired for not doing things right. In fact, my boss said to me, of all the people we were going to have to lose, you're the one we really hate to lose. We're so glad we found you. But, we have to downsize. The corporate headquarters are telling us we need to downsize to make some financial adjustments because our profit margin is not what it used to be. And you were the latest hire. So last person in, first person out, because you have no seniority. So I lost my job just like that, downsized. All of this in the same 5-day period. But now that wasn't enough because life said, oh, poor old Neale, we've only just begun. So then came the triple whammy. I'm in my car driving to an interview for another job, which I felt certain I was going to get, by the way, because I had all the right qualifications and great recommendations from my boss, who just had to let me go. So I thought, I'm going to get this new job like that. Except I never made it to the interview because an elder gentleman turned left in front of me on the roadway and crashed into my car, created a tremendous automobile accident, not a fender bender, but a major, major car accident, crashing right into the driver's side of my car, making a left turn right into my car. He misjudged, how far away from him my car was. I was tootling along. I wasn't even driving fast. I never drive fast. In fact, most people, accuse me of being driving too slow. Come on, step on it, step on it. But he hit me. Wendy, I didn't have a few scrapes or a couple of bruises. I wound up with a broken neck. And it wasn't even a hairline fracture. I remember to this day the wording on the report. I had a 3/4 inch avulsion fracture of the 7th cervical vertebrae posteriorly. In other words, a break in my neck large enough to put a pencil through. Now, the doctor said to me when I woke up, they gave me painkillers, of course. But when I woke up at the hospital, the doctor said to me, you must understand, Mr. Walsch, that most people who have a break in their neck that's severe die, usually instantly, because of spinal cord complications. But you survived. Not only did you survive, but you also were not even paralyzed, because the people who don't die, the 2% who don't die, are usually paralyzed from the neck down. You even escaped that with an injury so severe we can't imagine. So it's a total miracle. He leaned over me. I'm lying on the table, and he said, so what do you intend to do with the rest of your life? Because you've been given a gift here today, Mr. Walsch. I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So, I thought, well, I'll get a job. It won't take me long. I'll find another job. But you know what? Nobody would hire me because they put me in what they call a Philadelphia collar. That's a plastic collar that holds your head up, and when your neck will not support your head, and nobody would hire me, and I couldn't figure out. I was going interview after interview after, and I was applying for all sorts of jobs, not just a job in my field. I was applying for jobs at gas stations, at grocery stores, stock boy. I said, I'll do anything. I would say to the manager of the store, I'll do anything. I just need to earn a few pennies, just enough to afford my little, apartment and some child support. Please help me. Nobody would hire me. Finally, one man told me the truth. He said, Mr. Walsch, you have all the qualifications we need, but we can't hire you with that therapeutic device around your neck. One wrong move while you're working for us, we'll be paying your hospital bills for the next 4 years. We come back when that therapeutic device is gone. We would hire you in a minute. So nobody would hire me. Of course, I ultimately ran out of money, and I couldn't pay the rent in my little studio apartment that I was renting. And the landlord finally said, Neale, I'm sorry, but we've got to ask you to leave. Either pay the back rent, because I was 3 months behind in the rent, and keep up the payments from now on, or we have to ask you to go. I said, I have no income, and I've ran out of savings. He said, I'm sorry, we have to ask you to leave. So he evicted me. I'm now living on the street, Wendy. I had nowhere to go. So I'm living on the sidewalk, sleeping on the concrete, going from person to person with my hand out. Anything would help. Anything would help. And I wasn't a young man. If I was 23 or 25 or 34, even 41, I could have thought, okay, I can get through this. I was in my mid-50s, and I was, trying to make this all work. And I couldn't figure out, what does it take to make life work? What have I done to deserve a life of such continuing struggle? But I finally did find a little part-time weekend job. Somebody gave me a Saturday and Sunday job as a weekend fill-in person. And I did it. And I made just barely enough money to cover the rent on my little studio apartment and put a few pieces of bread in the larder. But I wasn't, living high off the hog. But at least I was surviving, and at least I was out of the weather. And then one day I woke up in the middle of the night, and I thought, okay, somebody tell me the rules. I'll play. I will play this stupid game. Just somebody give me the rules. And I'm shouting at God now in my mind. Just, God darn it, just tell me the rules. And by the way, after you give me the rules, don't change them. Because my experience has been that all the rules of life are changing every 45 minutes. I'd like somebody to just, tell me with consistency, what is it you want from me? What do you want? And I went out, to the couch of my little apartment, and I started writing. I saw a yellow legal pad on the coffee table in front of me. And so I picked it up and I started writing an angry letter to God. It's 4:23 in the morning, but I'm just trying to get my anger out. So I'm writing a little letter to God, just, as an exercise. Dear God, and I'm writing all these questions down. What does it take to make life work? Come on. And then I heard a voice. Wendy, I would have sworn there was somebody in the room with me. I turned around. There's nobody there. So I thought, oh, great. Now on top of everything else, I'm losing my mind. But it was the gentlest, sweetest voice I had ever heard. And the voice said, Neale, sweetheart, do you really want answers to all of these questions? Or are you just venting? I can remember sitting there thinking, on the couch, sitting there thinking, do you think I'm venting? Yeah, hello. But if you've got answers, I'd sure as hell like to know what they are. And the voice said, you are sure as hell. But wouldn't you rather be sure as heaven? I know. And I said in writing, what's that supposed to mean? God said, relax. I'm going to answer every question you ever had. And Wendy, she did. She answered every question I ever had. Who am I? Why am I here? Who are you? What is life really all about? And I couldn't believe the answers that I was getting, but I was writing everything down because I thought, I can't allow myself to forget this. I've got to keep this. So I wrote everything down. And then I was told about a third of the way through what became later, the first book. I was told, you will make of this one day a book. And you will cause it to be accessed by many people. And I thought to myself, now I got you. Now I got you. Because part of you thought, I'm just imagining this. It's just my imagination. So I thought, if it really is God, I can imagine, some publishers are really going to put this out there. Can you imagine, the publisher going to the workroom floor and saying to his editors, hold the presses, stop everything. I got a guy here who's talking to God. It's not going to happen. Nobody's going to publish a book by a man who says he's talking to God and that God is answering him. So I sent it off to a publisher on the East Coast of the United States on a dare. Just daring God. Show me. Well, the publisher called me a week and a half or two later and said, we want to put this book out. It's a fascinating piece of work. I said, you're kidding me. He said, no, we're going to put it out. I said, it's not going to sell 500 copies. If a book by a guy who says he's talking to God and that God is answering him, nobody's going to. And they said, well, we're going to give it a try. Well, they did publish the book, and I was right. It didn't sell 500 copies. Sold 5 million. Wound up, not bragging, just saying, wound up being on the New York Times bestseller list for 137 weeks. I'm like, what? What? Now, the major publishing houses, because this was a relatively small independent publisher that put the first book out. Now the big publishing houses in New York, Random House, Putnam, all the major companies were calling me saying, because they saw the sales of the book. Obviously, it was, when it's on the bestseller list for week after week after week after week. So they called me. What would it take for you to write another one for us? And I wound up with a multi-book contract with one of the major publishers in the United States. But now I'm under this pressure. I've got to figure out, how to do this on purpose rather than, just as a happenstance. That's how I developed my little 6-step process that I used. And that's what I put in this latest book, which we titled GODTALK. Essential stories about humanity's connections with the divine. Because I wanted to make the process that I kind of fell into, I wanted to make that available to anybody who wanted to give it a try, to see if they might also realize a closer connection with the divine in some way or another. So when I got the call from the publisher, would you be willing to write such a book? I said, yes, I'd be happy to. And I did. I wrote a book containing that little 6-step process that helps people, I hope, move closer to their own connection with the divine. Many, many people, I mean, millions of people pray to God every day, but not very many people say that God talks back to them. And even if they did imagine that God was intervening in their lives, they would never tell anybody else, well, God told me yesterday, because they wouldn't speak in those terms, because they don't want to be marginalized or ridiculed, or worse yet, thought of as having lost it somehow, or being a blasphemer or an apostate or a heretic. So people have conversations with God all the time. They just call it something else. Women's intuition, or a psychic hit, or an epiphany, or a sudden brilliant idea. They give it whatever words they can use to describe what I call conversations with God. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Aren't you sorry you asked? You asked me a 30-second question, you get a 25-minute answer.
No, actually, this is brilliant synchronicity, because you've already tied into 2 other questions I'd come up with. But I'd like to ask, though, did you find through your journey that eventually the loneliness for you personally left?
Yes, of course, because I no longer felt lonely in my soul, because I had a companion. You know what's, to be fair, Wendy, I always believed in a God of some sort. I mean, since I was a child, I believed that, okay, there's some kind of higher power. There's more going on here than meets the eye. So I had kind of a broad-based belief in what I call God. But I never, ever, ever imagined that God would talk to me directly and answer my specific questions directly. And so when that started happening, of course, I ended my soul loneliness. I didn't feel lonely anymore. And thank goodness I got away from certain standard brand religions, which were teaching me that God would punish me if I didn't do what God demanded that I do. And God had a whole list of commandments that I had to obey. And if I disobeyed even one of them, I'd be going straight to hell. And you know what's sad, Wendy? I was told when I was 9 years old, I was in 3rd grade, and I was my parents had put me in a Roman Catholic elementary school. God bless them. I had wonderful parents, but they meant well, and they put me in this Roman Catholic elementary school. Now, the priest was coming into the class every Wednesday to teach catechism, which, to those who don't know what that word means, it's the doctrine and the dogma of the Catholic Church. But he's teaching, a 3rd grade class, doing his best to talk about the difference between mortal sin and venial sin. And I raised my 9-year-old hand. Father, could you give me the example of mortal sin? Because I was being told that mortal sin is a sin that if you die with a mortal sin on your soul, that is, if you haven't had a chance to go to confession and get absolution, if you die with a mortal sin in your soul, you're going straight to hell. So I said, what's an example? Because I'm thinking he's going to say, well, murdering somebody or stealing someone's life savings or something really bad. He said, sure, son. It's a mortal sin if you miss Mass on Sunday. And I said, what? Because wouldn't it be that was the very week that I missed Mass on Sunday? I was an altar boy. I was there every Sunday of my life as an altar boy. But I missed Mass that particular Sunday without a good excuse because they wanted me to play right field for the baseball team on the playground. It was the weekend playground World Series, so to speak, the citywide tournament. Neale, we got to have you in right field, And and it was an early start for the game. Started at 11 o'clock, and Mass at our parish started at 11 o'clock. So I missed the 11 o'clock Mass. 1 week of my life, and now I'm thinking I'm sitting in the ninth grade class. I mean, the third grade class. I'm 9 years old. I'm thinking, I got to get to confession. I got to get to confession. If I don't get to confession if I got hit by a car or something on the street, I'm going straight to hell. The priest just told me that God will punish me with everlasting damnation in the fires of hell for missing church one Sunday without a good excuse. This is the God that I was told that I should be falling in love with. Love your Father in heaven. I couldn't put it together. So Wendy, for me, that was the first break. I mean, I was 9 years old and I thought, this can't be the way it is. Something doesn't add up here. God can't be that vicious to send a 9-year-old boy to hell for missing Mass. I mean, talk about trying to fill the pews with fear. So I began questioning every dogma of the world's great religions, not just the dogma of the Catholic Church, but I looked at a lot of the world's religions, and I found a way big list, a huge list of things that I couldn't believe that people are being told that God requires. If you belong to a certain religion, you can't eat certain kinds of food, or you're going to be sent to damnation. If you belong to a certain other religion, you have to wear certain clothing, and if you're a female, you can only allow yourself to look through a little slit in front of you, and everything else must be covered. You can't allow yourself to be seen in public. And by the way, you can't leave your house and even be in public unless you're with a male relative. And if you disobey those rules, and the morals police will capture you, they'll catch you on the street if you're not obeying the rules, and they'll punish you right there on the sidewalk. Then you'll also be sent to hell. So the stuff that I was being told about a God who sends you to hell, to everlasting damnation for what you're wearing, what you're eating, and whether or not you're going to church. Wait a minute. Something wasn't adding up. And so that's what I finally came up with. But yes, to answer your question, my soul loneliness ended because God said to me, Neale, I'm always with you. I'm not always with you because I'm a companion. I'm always with you because you are a part of me. I am inside of you. We're not separate in any way, any more than a wave is separate from the ocean. It's an arising, an individuation of the ocean, but it's not something other than the ocean. It's simply an individuation, a spectacular singularization of the singularity. And when the wave is finished with its beautiful expression, it recedes back into the ocean whence it came, to arise again on another day, in another way. So, Neale, you are a wave on the ocean of divinity. Go out there and make waves.
Oh, I love it. You have such a wonderful way of taking such complex topics and bringing them down to such a simple understanding. I really enjoyed the tools section of the book, and what you were just saying reminded me that the one that I sort of resonate the strongest with was the unworthiness issue of that unworthiness keeps us from feeling we can have that relationship and direct communion with the God within. And I think your books are so beautifully timed, no coincidence there, because as we went through the 90s and 2010s, there was this feeling that people were just hungry for spirit. They just were looking for some sort of deeper connection. And I think it's wonderful that you brought this work forward. Do you want to? Is there anything you can add about worthiness? I read through the logic of it, but maybe women suffer from this a little bit more, the worthiness issue. But it is something that can crop up even when you know you are sort of working your path. And have you found any little tricks for that, or you have any wisdom you can share on that one?
I, I've had the only trick I could share was to ask God, do you see me as being worthy of you and of being worthy of experiencing you and having you be part of me and being able to hear what it is you have to say? Am I worthy? And then listen to the answer that we get from the divine, because most people feel that worthiness is an issue, unless we're the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury or the chief ulama or the head rabbi or somebody who's at least has some credentials, somebody who's got some sacred credential, or but most of us don't imagine that we would be, in fact, as a Catholic, not to be railing against the Catholic Church, but I was taught as a Catholic, I was taught that I'm not worthy. Not only was I taught that God doesn't talk directly to people, but I was taught that I was not worthy. God, I am unworthy to even walk in your footsteps. So I was taught to say prayers that announced my unworthiness. And so, so I don't know whether it's more present in the lives of women. When you said that, I was a bit surprised, because I see it just the opposite. I see the ladies in my life as being far nicer, far more compassionate, far more understanding, way more sensitive, and more deeply caring in the way they act in the world than most of the men that I know. So to me, it's just the opposite. That men feel, if anyone is going to feel worthy, it would be women who at least have the good sense to be sensitive, caring, understanding, compassionate, forgiving, generous, emotionally generous, and kind to other people. They're not out there trying to, work profits, and get the best in every situation. That's been my experience. And I've often said to my darling wife, who I'm blessed with in my life, I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to be as sweet, as emotionally generous, as caring, as sensitive, as understanding, as patient, and as wise as you are. And my wife says to me in return, well, I'll give you this much. You know how to keep a lady around. You keep talking like that, I'm gonna hang around. But I really mean it. I really mean it when I talk to her. I said, honey, I'm not giving you a line. This isn't Neale's line. This is my true experience of you.
As we're talking, and I thought of the worthiness thing. I realized that you're right. So much of our culture and the long history of the past religions and things, we've sort of have this long-term unworthiness issue that we have been brought forward with. It's funny. I kind of want to jump into a really interesting part of the book that is.
I mean, Kathy, one last word on that. in the Catholic Church, I was taught to pray before communion, Lord, I am unworthy that thou should enter under my roof. I was taught to pray that, to announce my unworthiness. What kind of a God wants me to announce that I'm unworthy of receiving her in my life? Her? Wait a minute. You mean God doesn't have a penis? Oh my God. What am I? How dare I imagine that a God could be a female? So, but conversations with God said to me, Neale, sweetheart, I don't have a gender. You think I'm male or female? I do not have a gender. I'm simply pure love. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were about to say.
Oh, no. I've also been contemplating the words pure love as I've read the book. And maybe this is a good time to do that and save that second one for after, because that might be a good segue. Yeah, I was contemplating pure love. And I think that the hardest part, I always say life is easy. It's the person to person part that's really hard. It's the part with people that's really hard. But life in general is kind of easy. And there's this thing where you really want to look at your fellow man, even if you're in a disharmony with them, and try to step back and see that God within them, and that benevolent force is within them also. And I think that's a very great challenge that we're all being called to now in this global world. And do you want to speak about that at all, or address that a little bit? That we are already sort of, that pure love is within us, and it's like, well, we peel these layers and we do healing and we do what we can and to try to experience that pure love. And we try to remind ourselves, well, when I'm talking to that person, I might be having a hard time with what they're saying, but I can still hold them in that divinity, and that to do that as an exercise, and to try to find that essence of that pure love within us, that we can then radiate that out as a way of being. That's sort of
And that we can also recognize in another, even when in moments when they may not be reflecting it, that we can see past the illusion of who they imagine they are. I was told in conversations with God, Neale, nobody does anything inappropriate given their model of the world. What a remarkable statement in one single sentence. Neale, sweetheart, listen to me, she said. No one does anything inappropriate given their model of the world. Everyone thinks they're doing the right thing. No one gets up in the morning and says, wonder what wrong thing I could do today. So no one is deliberately acting with malice. Even when they are deliberately acting with malice in a certain sense, they think it's the right thing to act that way for various reasons that create their model of the world. So don't judge people, Neale. Judge not and neither condemn. Raise not your fist to heaven and curse the darkness not, but be a light unto the darkness, that you might know who you really are, and that all those whose lives you touch might know who they really are as well. So I've tried to do that when I encounter people whose points of view, to say nothing of their actions, differ tremendously from what I would prefer and from my own.
yes. You're bringing up a really interesting thing that you can have as an experience. So you may be on your God path, and you are loving it, and you are starting to get a practice of it. And there's in your tools that you talk about, I brought up worthiness, and another one is shoot, I just left my mind. But anyway, you're on your path, and there's this, it's curb your enthusiasm, and you do get very enthusiastic, and you want to either talk about the healing or be with people, other healers. And I have found on several occasions after the fact, now that you were never interrupted, and they never said that they were uncomfortable with your conversation at the time, but after the fact you get pulled aside and it's like, and you get told like, well, really spiritual people don't actually talk about spiritual things. People who are really into God don't talk about God. And based on the premise of your the end of your book, where you're encouraging people to do that, I thought that was really brilliant. And I find, we go in groups and find people of like mind and we can all do our little thing together. But when you're out in the general group of people of all walks of life, I saw a great line in a movie once. It's like the person saying it said, well, the C word. And wait a minute, I forget it. Well, anyway, it's the words that people whisper: cancer and God. Like you can't speak about that. And it is interesting that I have experienced some censoring when I brought it up, the conversation of God with people.
And you're not supposed to, I thought you meant the other C word, conservative, or the L word, liberal, because this is what I was told as a child. As a young man, I was told, do not discuss religion or politics in polite company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was told that in polite company, you don't bring up politics and you don't bring up religion. But what I'm saying in the book, God Talk, is we need more talk about God. We need people who will be idea heroes and step out and share what they understand God to be about and what they understand ourselves to be in relationship to all the rest of that. So we need to have more conversations about God, not just conversations with God. And I'm encouraging that, as you said, toward the end of the book, where I tell people that the world would change if we could reach critical mass with the number of people who are willing to bring up God in the course of an ordinary conversation. Not proselytizing, not preaching, not trying to sermonize, but just to, as a point of interest in a normal conversation. Sometimes people will talk to me about stuff about politics or the rising prices or the difficulty of life or whatever it is they're talking about. And I might just say out of the blue, gee, I wonder what God would think about that. What if there even is a God? I often think about what God would think about what you're saying. And it's the first time anyone has ever said anything like that to them. And all of a sudden, we're in a really interesting conversation. Sometimes they'll say, oh, there's no such thing as God. We're making all of that up. And other people will say, yeah, I've wondered about that too. Or a third person might say, do you think God even cares? But all of a sudden, we're having a conversation about God. And who knows? Sometimes I might be able to make a point that would cause them to go back to their house, back to their home, when they're all by themselves, and think, you know what, that weird guy on the street that I met at the post office? Wow, interesting that I would run into him. What an interesting guy. And you can start people thinking again, because we don't think about God enough in this society. If our culture really gave some thought to who we are and why we're here, and to who and what God really is, we couldn't possibly behave the way we behave with each other. It would be utterly impossible.
Yes, that's another. I think so many of us want change, and we want maybe not to have another war, and we want to see some peace on earth and people getting along, and more cooperation within societies and corporations, and I think I think a lot of people feel this way. There's
Well, of
more.
course they do.
I'm sorry.
Of course they do.
Yes,
Everybody wants a better life.
and a better world.
Yes. And our world is falling apart politically, economically, spiritually, socially, racially, every way you can think of, the place is falling apart. So it's time to put the world back together again, but with new building blocks. to create a whole new species, a whole new civilization based on an entirely different understanding of who we are, why we're here, and what it is that God wants.
Yes, I like that picture very much. And so many stories that you put in of people's personal stories of connection and conversation with God or experiences they've had are very inspiring. Stories like that really uplift people.
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but that is part of the book. Part of the book when the publisher got me to say, yes, I'll write that book, they said, we're going to put an invitation out on the internet asking other people. So they did. They went on the internet and they said to the general public, if you ever feel that you've had an intervention by the divine in your life in some way, shape, manner, or form, please send us your story. And hundreds of people wrote their stories into the publisher, and they picked out the 7 most interesting stories of people who've claimed to have their own interaction with the divine. So those stories are also not just my story, but those other stories from regular, ordinary folks, not best-selling authors, but just regular people on the street telling their story about how God has intervened in their life. So it makes for, I think, a fascinating book, which is why we called it GODTALK.
Yes, I agree. I think it's very timely and very well written. You do have a gift of simplifying, as I said. And I would come up with a question and then I'd read further and go, oh, well, there's the end of that question.
Yes.
It was very, very fun to go through. And I wanted to put up for the audience the cover so that they can see that. And we're going to have links below, but we'll talk about that at the end. I just think this is the cat's pajamas of books to come out right now.
Thank you. Those are very sweet things to say. I hope people don't feel that we're just, all I'm doing is hawking my wares, so to speak, promoting my books. It's not really my intention. But when I was called by the publisher and asked if I would write this book, I was very grateful, because I do think, honestly and truly, that it can be of help to many people. Some people will not agree. They'll throw the book away and say, this is a bunch of nonsense, and that's okay. I say to people, I'm not trying to change anybody's mind, or I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. But if you find something in the book of value and you think it could be of use to you, then by all means, like any good reference, use it, use the material.
Those of us in the healing arts say that the times that we're in, you really need some tools to stay balanced. And I think it was brilliant that you put tools in to give people a guidance for that personal conversation with God.
Thank you for saying that, and I hope people find that to be true for them.
Do you have any particular tools you use that you find work in meditation or in a daily basis, or are they all in the book?
Well, number one, they're all in the book, especially those 6 particular tools: possibility, worthiness, willingness, wakefulness, acceptance, and discernment. Those are the 6 tools that I placed in the book. And discernment, which you talked about a minute ago, is the 6th and final tool, because we have to make sure we don't misunderstand certain things and wind up calling, everything intervention by the divine. If I pull my car keys out of my pocket, and a $50 bill or a $20 bill falls out of my pocket, that's not a sign, oh, I should throw all my $20 bills on the sidewalk. If you're going to give away $20 bills, give them to people who need them. Walk down the street and find a homeless person and share a $20 bill with that person, but don't just throw your money on the ground. So we have to. So those are my tools are wakefulness, discernment, tools such as that, and I explain each of those tools in depth in the dialogue, hoping that people can apply them in their moment-to-moment experience.
Very good and very helpful and very timely. Um, what do you think of the possibility of, I'm in the healing arts, so my focus is very myopic that way. And what do you think about us coming together in large groups and putting it up to God talk and saying, hey, can we heal out some of our past in our collective conscious to make room for less charge between humans? Is that a possibility?
I hope that it is, because we need to reach critical mass with these new ideas about who we are, why we're here, the purpose of life, and who and what God really is. So I hope, yes, that we can reach critical mass. And you know what? Physicists are telling us right now that critical mass is not what many people think it is. It's not like 51%, one more than half. That's not critical mass. It's not even 30%. It's not even 10%. Physicists tell us that critical mass is anywhere between 3.5 and 5% of the whole number. Now that's reachable. We could do that on this planet. We could get 3.5 to 5% of the people to begin considering seriously a different thought about who we are, why we're here, who God is, and the genuine and true and real purpose of life itself. But it's going to be up to all of us to commit to being what I call an idea hero. An idea hero is someone who's willing to put an idea out there, even though they may know ahead of time that the largest number of other people may seriously disagree with them. Galileo was such an idea hero. He said in 1614, the earth revolves around the sun. And of course, at that time, everyone was being told by the Catholic Church that the sun revolves around the earth. That was the official teaching of the church. And they condemned Galileo and put him under house arrest for the rest of his life, demanding that he recant. But the Catholic Church finally saw, the truth of the matter, and they realized that actually the earth does revolve around the sun. Galileo was right. 352 years later, 1996, it took the Catholic Church to admit that they were wrong. And Galileo was right. So what we need are more Galileos. We need more idea heroes who are willing to say, I know what you guys think is true, but consider at least the possibility that we may not have all the information here. And that's the question that I ask people to consider. Is it possible, just possible, that there's something we don't fully understand here about God and about life, the understanding of which would change everything? Thank you for having me on this program with you today. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you so much for all your sharing. And thank you for joining the Great Global Healing Party. It's been an honor. I've been trying to figure out a word to say, and that's the only one that comes up. But that's why I use the word I'm tickled pink to be able to interview you and talk with you. I thank you for your time. I'm going to tell the audience that below you'll find links to Mr. Walsh's website and two links to purchase his book. And I want to thank the audience for joining in the Great Global Healing Party, and we'll see you in the next speaker interview. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, my friend. Blessed be.